On today's episode, our week 6 fantasy football preview. We're going in depth on 9 games. You heard it here first. We did 6 games last week. We brought Aiden in. He's back in the fold. We're doing 9 games this week, the 9 most important games that matter for fantasy football. We're dissecting each game from every angle. We have Vegas point totals, projected pace, actionable stats, and start sits in every matchup. A start and sit in every matchup. You know what that means, dear listeners?
A
It means
lot of
opportunities for
milk.
you to win, but a lot of milk. A lot of spoiled milk, I'll tell you that. But we are excited nonetheless. First matchup of the weekend, fellas. Who wants to take it? Who wants to take the baton? Who wants to kick things off?
I'll do it. I'll do it.
He's
Let's
going to
get
do
Aiden back
it.
in a driver's seat here.
I'll see if I still
Aiden.
got it. I'll see if I still got it here. Yeah.
What are we starting off with, Aiden?
We're getting greedy, baby. We're talking about my Chicago Bears. Yeah. We're talking about the Chicago Bears, baby. The Minnesota Vikings are taking a trip over to Soldier Field at 10 a.m. Pacific. They opened at -3. It bounced down a little bit, but has stayed pretty consistent. So the books are kind of holding put at -3. Obviously, no Justin Jefferson. So a week or two ago, you're probably looking at this line and thinking that's probably going to be a line around 8 or 9 points. So a much different outlook in this game than I think we would have seen, again, a week or two ago. Total is at 43.5. I'm seeing actually 44 on you, but it's okay. Just half a point off. One thing to keep your eye on, which I think is going to be a big factor in your start and sits, is the weather. I had even a higher percent chance of rain, but it could be a little sloppy out there. So it's going to be a little cold, 50 degrees. We're kind of getting into that cold bear weather. I had closer to 40% chance. And yeah, the winds are gusting. I had about 15 miles an hour myself. So could be a little sloppy out there. Just looking at these two teams in terms of pace, they both like to play pretty quick, especially the Vikings, who continue to lead the NFL in the highest pass rate. Bears right in there too, but just looking at our matchup here, this figures to be what we're looking at here is the second quickest game of the week. Looking at these teams just from a bit of a higher level, the Bears are 12th in the NFL at 26 points per game. The Vikings are just behind them at 22. Both defenses have been pretty generous too. The Chicago's giving up the third most points, allowing 31.5 points, whereas Minnesota is a bit stingier at 24.4, but by no means is the best defense in the world. So again, keep an eye on this weather. If things are clear, I think we could have quite a shootout. If not, things could get a bit muddy out there, and this could get under pretty quickly. Not to mention, both of these teams are 1-4, so it's kind of like nut up or shut up for both of them. I think if the Vikings lose, you go full fire sale. If the Bears lose, we're back to the Caleb edits. So things are quick. Things are going to move quickly this weekend with both of these fan bases. Moving on a bit here, just looking at these teams in terms of how do they match up against each skill group. The Bears against they actually give up the most amount of points to quarterbacks at just over 22.5 points per game, so quite generous. Same with running backs, third most there with just over 30 points. Going on to wide receivers, they're about mid-pack. Just about 36.8. I've got more on wide receivers there, but I will save that. And then you've got tight ends. It's 8th most, but it's tight ends. The whole position's kind of been a crapshoot. Hawkinson's probably going to feast, but there's kind of just no one else there. Going on to the Vikings, about mid-pack for most of these. 9th most to QBs at about 20. 9th least to running backs at about 16. Third most to wide receivers at just over 47 points a game, which I think is pretty glaring, and the 13th most to tight ends at 12.8. Looking at some starts and sits on the Bears side, obviously you're firing up Justin Fields and DJ Moore. They're on an absolute heater, so there's kind of no debate on that one. I think it's worth monitoring the Bears' backfield. It's looking like Roschon is going to miss this game, barring a practice tomorrow. He's been a DNP all week. I think Foreman is worth a start if he does not play. I don't really care that the Vikings are 9th least running back. Like, they're about mid-pack there. The Bears' run game looked dramatically better last week with the return of Tevin Jenkins. Slotting him in there at left guard, the dude is an absolute wall, especially in the run game. It felt like he was an absolute stabilizing force. So I'm okay with a bit of a flyer there on Foreman. I also wanted to note on Darnell Mooney, who tends to do pretty well against the Vikings, averaging just under 60 yards a game in his career. Really hasn't taken off this year yet. He's still an extremely talented wide receiver, though. Guy in a contract year. Justin Fields is starting to click. Don't be surprised if Mooney finds the end zone and maybe gets you 50, 70 yards. I think we're kind of due for one of those. Any other wide receiver on the Bears, though, I'm sitting. I think outside of DJ, Mooney, and Cole Kmet, I wouldn't trust anyone in that passing game. So that's where I sit with the Bears kind of skill position players. Moving on to the Vikings, Kirk is still a must start. Even without Justin Jefferson, the Bears have been super generous. Slot in Jordan Addison as well. He should be their wide receiver one. We'll see if KJ Osborne ends up being that guy, but he was ducking under the football last week, so I don't have a ton of confidence in him.
Oh, so bad.
Crazy.
So bad.
Hawkinson's going to feast. I think Hawkinson's the biggest beneficiary of the JJ injury. He should get 10-plus targets every single week. There's kind of no excuse for it. He's by far and away their best pass catcher. Going on to sits, I'm doing Alexander Mattison. I know you're thinking, but they're third most against running backs. Why would I sit Alexander Mattison? Snaps are going down. Cam Akers are going up. And the Bears were actually pretty stingy last week against Washington, who's got some good running backs. They gave up 29 yards on 10 carries. Granted, they just aired the ball out all day. Pretty impressive to see them kind of buckle down against the run. So I'm sitting Mattison. I just think on top of that, his role is going to get a little dicier with JJ out. I don't think they're going to be scoring as much. JJ kind of makes that offense run. And I think as an offense overall, they're going to slow down. So I'm sitting Madison, tossing Osborne and Powell too. I'm not ready to start either one of those guys. Just kind of put a bow on this. I know we talked about Bears secondary giving up a handful of points. This will be the first game this season that the entire Bears secondary is healthy and starting. So Eddie Jackson will be playing his first game this year. Jalen Johnson is returning from a hamstring. Kyler Gordon has recovered from his broken hand. Tyree Stevenson has been playing, and all wheels up, dude. We finally have the full band back together. Pretty excited to see these guys, as it feels like if we're going to get beat this week, it'll probably be in the passing game, but getting your entire starting secondary back and playing for the first time is massive. So kind of just keep an eye on the weather here. This game has a lot of potential to be pretty fun with these two offenses, but if the weather's sloppy, have a plan B for sure.
Wow, sitting Madison, it's almost like I'm playing you this week with Madison in my lineup. I see what you're doing there.
I've been fading him all year, and I'm not gonna stop now.
Chestnut checkers, I like that. Wow, I really hope the weather doesn't spoil this, because this feels like a big Justin Fields game.
Oh yeah.
Keegan's not entertained. He's been yawning the whole entire time.
Dude, I'm sorry. I hate yawning on camera. Sometimes you just have yawns, and then
we put him
you
to
just
sleep.
like keep going.
We put Keegan to sleep.
No, I'm just like I just want to go to bed with happy dreams of Jordan Addison toasting the healthy Bears secondary. So I think I'm mentally preparing myself.
He heard Aiden talking about the Bears secondary, and he went name by name, and he was like, "All right, I'll wake me up when this is over.
Let me know when it's my turn.
put me the merciless end of this." Okay, so I like this one. I feel pretty good about this matchup. Keegan, can I steal the mic? I kind of want to cover my first matchup.
Dude, go ahead.
I'm super excited about this one. And listeners at home, we got a timer going. I'm put a timer on myself for 5 minutes. So let's see how this goes for the listeners here, the mean team. My matchup of the week here is the Seattle Seahawks versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Vegas has this spread pretty tight. They have Seattle favored by 2.5 here at Cincinnati. If I were a gambling man living in a gambling state, the Bengals as home dogs kind of interest me. I'm not gonna lie here. The line opened at 3.5. It was 2.5. Now it's +3 in some books. So it's actually been bouncing around. As you can see, it's ranging. Point total here, 45 points, opened at 44.5. This game doesn't project to be as pass happy as Minnesota at Chicago. But if you take a look at this is actually the 6th fastest game on the slate. So we feel pretty good about fantasy points being scored in this one. I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth, and I actually think it's going to be one of the best games of the weekend. When we're taking a look at fantasy points positionally to get an idea of like where these points are going to shake out against these defenses, it's Seattle, I'm going to sound like a jaded 49ers fan, but Seattle's defense isn't as good as it's kind of getting hyped up to be in terms of points allowed at respective fantasy positions. When you're looking at these two specific defenses, the Seahawks are 19th against quarterbacks. They've turned around 18 fantasy points per game. 17th against running backs, about 20 fantasy points per game. 30th, so bottom four against wide receivers at 49 points per game. And 7th against tight ends, around 8 points per game. Flipping over to the Bengals side of things, the Bengals have been stingier than the Seahawks. The Seahawks, and we think of this defense, scoring a touchdown and looking very great, getting 10 sacks against Daniel Jones. But the Bengals have actually suppressed more fantasy points than Seahawks here at just specific positions. This does not agree with my take. Because the Seahawks have been on a bye. There we go. There we go. Dear listeners that are confused.
Everyone hang with us. We're
the Seahawks have been on a bye. This is technical.
Hang with us, people. It's all right.
Wow. Filtered by points per game here. This is exciting stuff here with the mean team. Taking a look at the Bengals have surrendered or 8th against quarterbacks with 14 fantasy points per game, 15th against running backs with 20 fantasy points per game, 17th against wide receivers, 22nd against tight ends, close to 15 fantasy points per game. That's interesting. The Bengals have been middle of the pack. The Seahawks have been hemorrhaging fantasy points. In terms of who you're starting and sitting in this one, I am buying the Joe Burrow resurgence. He looked great moving out of the pocket, throwing the ball deep. He's a top 10 play this week for me. Jamar Chase is going to go absolutely bananas. Yes, he is open. He is always fucking open. Excuse my profanity. And he got challenged by DK Metcalf and Devin Witherspoon this week in the media. Probably not a good idea to challenge an alpha like Jamar Chase. The Seahawks have bled fantasy points to wide receivers, which means if he's healthy, I guess you can start T. Higgins. He should probably be in your lineup too.
You hate T. Higgins.
Never again. Joe Mixon, he's got an elite role against a rush defense that is tied for 4th in rushing TDs allowed this season. Moving on to the Seahawks, Geno's a bit sketchier, but considering the Bengals have been pretty stingy, middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points to quarterbacks, I think this is going to be a high-scoring one with some back and forth. I think you're safe to start Geno, especially if you're on Anthony Richardson replacement duty. It's hard to turn away from him, especially considering that their offensive line could be getting 3 out of 4 starters back, so they're getting healthier. Get DK and Lockett in the lineup. I know DK hasn't really been practicing because of a rib injury, but I expect him to play. And K9 Kenneth Walker's in another smash spot. You're going to be starting him confidently. Sitting players in this matchup, it's still wait-and-see mode on JSN. I think it's very encouraging that the offensive linemen could be coming back, meaning they run less 2 tight end sets. Less 2 tight end sets mean more slot snaps for JSN. I think it could be very positive for his role coming out of the bye, but we're still in wait-and-see mode. No way can you start Noah Fant, but kind of a juicy matchup, so maybe if you're playing DFS, you can throw and sprinkle in a little Noah Fant. I really like all the guys in this matchup. I'm not really fading anyone. One nugget here, Joe Mixon is the only running back in the league who's had 100% of his team's rushes inside the 20, 10, and 5-yard line. That's insane. Doesn't matter if he's inefficient. He's got a Looney Tunes role. So what do you think, fellas, just real quick before we move on to Keegan's first matchup? How do we think this one shakes out? Anything catching our eyes?
I'm really excited for the Bengals, just given how they played last week and how Joe Burrow looked. Like, it was just a week and a half ago that it was a full-on fade with the Bengals offense because of Mr. Burrow himself. But that looked like the Burrow from last year and the Burrow from the year prior, exploding off that calf, taking deep shots to Chase. I think adding T. Higgins back, whether you like him or not, those are 2 dogs together in that offense. So I'm really excited. I could see that one potentially getting ugly. I think if that offense is clicking, there's not a lot of teams that can hang with them. I'm not buying the kind of alpha defense like you said. I think Jamar Chase will take Witherspoon's money. 7 days of the week. And you typically don't poke the bear like that. So I hope he makes him pay, because that'll be funny.
Keegan, what matchup are you highlighting here first?
Since Aiden kicked things off with the Bears, I'm just going to go ahead and kick things off with the Eagles flying into MetLife Stadium this week. Weather should be
Jets. Flying in. Wow. Do you mean did they fly in on a jet or with their wings?
Or via wings?
No, with their wings. They all actually just flew in on the back of Jason Kelsey's stupid podcast.
Or did they bus? Or did they take like a subway? Okay, by the way, Keegan's like saying, I hate Travis Kelce. This whole Swift nonsense is turning Keegan into
I'm so sick of Taylor Swift.
It's a hater level we haven't seen.
And I just don't
while.
understand why nobody in the NFL can cover a tight end that runs like a 5.2 40. I just don't really get it or understand.
He's elite. He's elite at beating zone coverage.
Elite at sitting in soft zone coverages where nobody's paying attention to him because the defense doesn't scheme for him, even though the offense only contains Rashee Rice, Sky Moore, and Kadarius Toney. It's so stupid. But anyways, we're not talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. We're talking about the New York Jets and the Philadelphia Eagles here. The opening spread for this was about 4. It's all the way down to Eagles -7. Over-under opened up at about 42.5. We're down to 41 here. So not a ton of points projected here on this end. Right now, the Eagles are projected. They have an implied total of like 24.5 points or something like that. But this game should be relatively like average paced. I wouldn't call it slow, but I wouldn't call it fast either. FanDuel, their pace article actually has this kind of like right outside the top 10 in terms of pace and fastest games in the league this weekend. But Philly, it's probably because Philly ranks number 1 in plays per game, but they're only 25th in adjusted pace. New York is what is going to slog this game down a little bit. They are not running a ton of plays. They're 32nd in plays per game and 28th in adjusted pace. But I expect Philly to kind of drive this matchup and be the one controlling the pace here, as I do see them as the better team here. And I think the Jets will get put into kind of like a negative game script, and they'll have to pass a little bit, and maybe it'll allow for some more plays in this game, but we'll see. The Jets are kind of entering this matchup not as quite elite defensively as they were last year, but still playing like at a pretty outstanding level right now, and especially in terms of fantasy. Not a whole lot of soft spots, but they are giving away some points to certain positions. Quarterback, they're allowing about 15.8 points per game to the position. Running back, they're allowing 24.1 PPR points per game, which is actually 9th worst in the league. So a little bit of a soft spot for them, as they've been getting chewed up in the past couple of weeks by the likes of like Isaiah Pacheco, Samaje Perine, and Jaleel McLaughlin. Have all had pretty outstanding fantasy games for them. So
those are terrible names to say out loud.
Which feels wrong
Perine,
because
McLaughlin and Pacheco.
And the reason it happens is, the pass rush is good. The middle linebackers and the linebacker play are good. The corner play is good, but we're just getting gashed on the run over in New York right now. All the tarmacs are clear for takeoff for any running backs flying into MetLife right now. But wide receivers are actually being held to a pretty modest 23.7 points per game in fantasy. But tight ends, they're allowing the first most points to tight end. Obviously, a lot of that outside cornerback coverage kind of shutting off the best receivers on every team, and you're funneling a lot of work into running backs and tight ends. That's kind of why you have that discrepancy there. Philly, on the other hand, they're allowing like some pretty good fantasy point production for certain positions. Quarterback, they're allowing almost 20 points per game. Running back, they've been pretty stout. They're like 31st in the league with only 12.4 PPR points per game. Wide receiver, 46.1 points per game against the Eagles, which is pretty brutal. Tight ends, they're allowing about 13.5. As far as who I'm starting this week in this matchup and who I like, you start Jalen Hurts because you have to. It could be a bit of an iffy thing, but I'll have a fun little nugget for that at the end of this. A.J. Brown, you start no matter what. Again, alpha wide receivers, you start them in alpha offenses. I think Garrett Wilson's in play this week for sure. I mentioned negative game script. The Jets are going to have to keep up with the Philadelphia Eagles some way or another, and they cannot rely just solely on a run game to stay in this game. If they want to win it, they have to pass. Last week, he had a 29.6% target share, and that's the lowest of the season for him this far, which is pretty outrageous. That's almost 30%, and that's the lowest of the year. He's going to be a volume play, I think. And obviously you think, well, what do you mean volume play? Like, he's going to get looks and he's going to get them often. And like I said, Eagles have been pretty friendly to fantasy wide receivers. And I don't think Darius Slay practiced today, is banged up, and potentially Jalen Carter is banged up as well too. Breece Hall, you play him because the gap between him and Dalvin Cook grows larger every week. And he has a legit dominating role in fantasy. And, he can turn almost any handoff into a home run right now. So I think you just have to play him and ride the hot hand. Dallas Goedert,
matchup.
It is a tough matchup, but I think you just let it ride again and see what he can do. And then Dallas Goedert, again, with a good fantasy start this week. The Jets giving up the most points to the tight end position, and they're actually leading the league in touchdowns allowed to the tight end position at 1.2 a game this year. So good spot for Goddard. I like Swift in this game. Good game script. He's getting massive usage right now, and he's got a good RB1 role. Like I mentioned, we just let Jaleel McLaughlin and Samaje Perine tear us up last week, and Swift is much, much better than that. Who you're sitting, any Jets player not named Breece Hall or Garrett Wilson. I think this could be a very tough matchup for Devonta Smith as well. I'm having trouble deciding which wide receiver is going to have a tough day, but I think I just by default have to say A.J. Brown will have a better one. And some fantasy nuggets from this game, like I mentioned, Philadelphia is second in the league when it comes to allowing wide receiver touchdowns per game at about 1.6 wide receiver touchdowns per game. Jets lead the league in touchdowns allowed per game to tight ends. That's why I mentioned Garrett Wilson and Dallas Goedert. But also, great spot for Jalen Hurts to get right on the run game. The Jets have allowed 32.6 yards per game to rushing, like from QBs, over 5 weeks. In the last 2 weeks, they're averaging about 50 rush yards per game to the QB position. And they've also given up the second most QB rushing yards this year on the season. So the Jets might be a really good spot for Jalen Hurts as if, just outside of the passing game. So it'll be a tough matchup. Obviously, our corners are playing out of their mind this year, but I still think there's a lot of points fantasy-wise to be had for Hurts and co.
I can't believe you're starting Breece. That seems like a sit for me.
I think
you don't sit somebody that just had his career high rushing. You just don't do that. This isn't Alexander Madison we're talking about. It's not Rashad White.
7-point dogs, and they've only given up 42 fantasy points on the year. This game could get out of hand and get out of hand fast.
Give me 5 running backs you would start over Breece Hall right now that somebody has rostered.
Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler.
That's not what I'm asking. Those are obvious starts. Like, you don't have that many options at the running back position.
Kyron Williams, Raheem Mostert.
The volume is back.
All you've listed is the top 8 running back starts. You start 2 running backs a week. You have to start.
I'd start
somebody.
Alexander Madison over Breece Hall.
No, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, okay.
Let's keep this rolling, boys. Let's keep this rolling.
That just doesn't make any sense.
This might be some milk. Matchup wise, but this might be some milk. Yeah, but we'll leave it at that.
I'm going to mediate this one. I'm excited for this one, Keegan. I think there's some fun matchups here. Let's take it back to the West Coast. We're getting on our jet. We're flying all the way back to SoFi Stadium, baby, to the team that I pretty much cover every week, and the Dallas Cowboys somehow with zero pride left, taking their bags to SoFi Stadium to take on the Los Angeles Chargers. So this one opened up at 2.5 in favor of them boys and has not really moved. That one's kind of just hanging out there. So again, kind of like my first one, Vegas, this is going to be a close one. You've got the highest total of the weekend at 50.5. All thanks to the Dome Bros. It is going to be electric in there. Should be sweet. I feel like I'm cheating calling it a dome because it's really not a full dome, but it is a dome. So we're moving on. This should be a fun one. These are two teams that in terms of pace are pretty quick. Chargers, absolutely, in terms of their game scripts and kind of the way it has. Dallas looks a bit slower on paper, but again, I think it has a lot to do with the type of games they've been in. Yeah, I saw it wasn't on this for whatever reason. I think this
because it's a Sunday and it's a Monday.
Yeah.
I'm pulling it right here. Yeah, I mean, adjusted rank, the Chargers are third.
Yeah.
And then Dallas is slower. Yeah, they're slower.
Yeah, but it's because they've had some games where they're just running the ball out of the clock. But I think this should be a pretty good game. They're 8th and 9th, respectively, in terms of points per game. So, again, these are two teams that want to score. The biggest gap here, obviously, is the defenses. The Chargers are giving up 26 points per game, where Dallas is a whole 10 points less at 16.6. So, again, the biggest gap is going to be the defense here. Does Dallas's defense show up, or do they piss down their leg like they did on Sunday night? I think back-to-back primetime games.
Second in fantasy points per game allowed versus 29.
Yeah,
that's a disparity.
It's quite a big gap. So, again, I think it's going to be a pretty high-scoring affair. It's also worth mentioning the Chargers are coming off a bye. So they've been game planning. They've been game planning for 2 weeks now. They just saw what the Niners did to them. You know, that defense is wounded without Diggs. Like it's not the defense that, you know, we saw the first 3 weeks. This is, I wouldn't say vulnerable, but there's weak spots in this defense now. Taking it down by positions. We'll start with the Chargers. It's pretty brutal, or I guess I'd say generous for the listeners here. It's pretty generous for us. They're giving up the 4th most to QBs at 21.7, 7th most to RBs at 26, 2nd most to wide receivers at 47.4, about mid-pack at 14th. To tight ends at 9 points. So it's generous. Yeah, this is a good get-back spot for all of your Cowboys skill players. Cowboys are quite a bit stingier. 7th least to QBs, just about 13. About mid-pack, 14th least to running backs at about 18. 2nd least to wide receivers, which isn't great. But again, we saw what just happened last week through the air, 23.7. About mid-pack in the tight ends, just under 13. Looking at the Chargers players, the only people I feel comfortable starting is the three-headed beast that is their offense. Welcome back, Austin Eckler. Happy to have you, man. We cannot watch any more Josh Kelly, so that's obviously a must-hammer, especially given that the soft spot in the Cowboys defense has been to running backs. They've been stingy through the air, but Austin Eckler, top 10 play, top 5 play this week. Justin Herbert, don't need to get into him, and I don't need to get into Keenan Allen either, because he's one of those matchup-proof guys. It's not like they've got Diggs, shadowing him and going across the field with him. So love all three of those guys. You can make a case for QJ or Josh Palmer, but you couldn't talk me into it until someone proves they're the true number 2. I'm not starting any of those guys unless I'm talking 2 flex league or a much deeper format where I'm playing more than your standard 2 wideouts, 1 flex, 2 running backs, 1 tight end. So I'm not doing that. And then I already said it, but yeah, Josh Kelly, you're sat forever. You should be cut from rosters. It's over for you, pal. You were out of fantasy relevance before it even got started, unfortunately.
What if he's only good when Eckler's in the lineup?
It would be so annoying.
His only good game was when he was playing with Austin Eckler. If that became
in relief, though, he was in relief too. He's good guy, Josh Kelly, but get the fuck out of here, Ari Gold, man. You're gone. Moving on to them boys. So I feel like everyone's kind of been crying about CD's wide receiver 16, boys. And everyone's acting like the sky's falling. CD's kind of acting like that too in the media, but it's this is such a hammer spot for CD Lamb. I think he's going to go absolutely apeshit against this Chargers defense. They can't guard air. I think he's going to have a massive game. Huge get right spot for Tony Pollard too. 2 stinkers after going over 15 points in his first 3. So really like both of their kind of big dogs to get back on track. And I like Jake Ferguson too. I think he's another guy we like. I'm starting Jake Ferguson. Chargers have been susceptible to tight ends, but I just think this offense is going to get right. You can start Dak Prescott. I didn't really have him as a start or a sit. I just think it's not very inspiring football, but he's doing. I'd probably lean start, but yeah, I'm not very high either way. Fun little nugget to put a bow on this that I think is going to be a big thing to watch in this game is the Chargers are currently 3rd in the league in deep pass attempts and 2nd in terms of deep pass percentage, throwing a deep 29 out of 154 pass attempts, whereas the Cowboys, on the other hand, have given up the 6th least amount of deep shots. So something's got to give here. If I had to guess, the Chargers win this battle. Without Trayvon Diggs, this secondary is for sure burnable. So this is going to be a fun one. It's the highest total of the weekend for a reason. I think we're in for a pretty good game on primetime, and I hope the Cowboys give us a good game and don't give us the same effort as last week.
I want the Chargers to come into this game and have Kellen Moore like absolutely embarrass the
Cowboys.
Cowboys.
Revenge game, Kellen. Revenge game.
Like I really want the Cowboys to see what they're missing in Kellen Moore. I watched a lot of stuff today and just some of like the clips from last week, and I'm just like, what is this offense that Mike McCarthy is calling? Like, he's killing things for us. Like, he's ruining the Pollard posse.
He's ruined everything.
He's tearing our CDs in half and just breaking them across his knees. Like,
I've got a theory for this, and this is the craziest stat I've seen in a long time. This is from Rich Rebar at Lord Reeves. Dallas has run 0 offensive plays with the score within 7 points in either direction in the second half this season of any game.
0 points when the game is
0
set.
0 snaps,
0 plays,
0 offensive snaps with the score within 7 points
in the second half.
Either direction through 5 weeks. Every game they've played in, they're either losing big time or they're up 30.
This will be closer. This one has to be close. The Chargers, but dude, I don't know. They could maybe blow out the Chargers because the deep. No, this game will be close.
I hope the Chargers blow them out.
No,
Eckler,
no, not for the posse.
Eckler and Pollard. If there's ever been a get right game, it is this week. My matchup is not as fun, but if you're a sicko and you're a degen, you're going to be following along with the Arizona Cardinals heading to Los Angeles. They're also going to be Dome Bros this weekend, or semi-Dome Bros. We're going to say, what, 3/4 Dome Bros at SoFi Stadium?
That's 78%.
Yeah, they're Dome Bros. We'll give it to them. Sunday afternoon game on Fox, 125.
I didn't realize they're both home this week.
They're both home.
That's a lot of work.
That's fun.
Yeah.
We call that a BOGO. We call that a BOGO. We call that a BOGO. The spread opens here. Rams is 7-point favorites. It opened at 4.5. So Vegas and they've really bet up the Rams, which I think is a good idea. This game opened at 45.5 as a point total. It is all the way up here to 48.5. So Vegas thinks this one's going to be a shootout, and the pace tends to agree. If you're looking here at FanDuel's pace matchup report, they have this one as the 5th fastest matchup of the weekend. I'm very excited to see both these offense play. In terms of the positional breakout and when these teams are on defense, the Rams here, they're 17th against quarterbacks, which surrendering around 20 fantasy points per game. They're 8th against running backs, so relatively stingy, surrendering around 16 fantasy points per game. They've given up a decent amount of points here to tight ends. They're ranking 29th. They've given up around 17 fantasy points per game to tight ends, but they've been really stingy against wide receivers, coming in at 5th, averaging around 29 fantasy points per game. So the Rams have been they've been a pretty decent defense this year with a bunch of nobodies, which is really interesting. But when you're looking at another defense with a bunch of nobodies in the Arizona Cardinals, they've been hemorrhaging fantasy points this season. They rank 30th against quarterbacks, surrendering 22 fantasy points per game, 31st against running backs, surrendering 32 fantasy points per game, 28th against wide receivers, 45 fantasy points per game. But against tight ends, first, they're only surrendering 6.5 fantasy points per game. 2 tight ends. So, pretty stingy. pretty stingy here. I guess if you're looking at these offenses, the Cardinals are really going to get beat at all levels. And if you're looking at the Rams, maybe you can do some damage against them in the run game. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical about what the Cardinals are going to be able to do in this game. Transitioning here to starts and sits, I think Matt Stafford is an absolute must start this week. The Cardinals have just been hemorrhaging fantasy points, and with Puka and with Cooper, Kupp, and Tutu Atwell, which is the funniest trio. Kupp, Puka, and Tutu. Puka and Tutu is insane. You throw in somebody whose names who's Cooper Kupp. It's an insane trio of names here. And then they got Higbee. It's a wild pass catching core they have there. With Puka and Kupp in the lineup, I'm all in on Stafford as a start this week. In 2 quarterback leagues, I think you can play Josh Dobbs. He's a little bit of a sneaky streamer considering the pace, considering the Vegas point total in this game, and considering that the Rams have been able to, they haven't been amazing at stopping quarterbacks. So I kind of like Dobbs as a sneaky super flex start this week. In terms of Puka and Kupp, you're starting them. I think Tutu is a decent play this week. We're dealing with a ton of injuries. It's going to be boom or bust, but I like him. He's going to be on the field a ton. We know these targets are going to go to Puka and they're going to go to Kupp, but don't sleep on Tutu. I can't believe these are words I'm saying in the year 2023. Kyren Williams is a top 8 play this week at running back. The Cardinals are a juicy matchup in the run game. Zach Ertz is a borderline must start. Again, 2023 is weird. It's weird. I can't considering the Rams are giving up 17 fantasy points per game to tight ends, and Zach Ertz has got a pretty clear number 2 receiving role in this offense week in and week out. I think you're starting Zach Ertz. Hollywood Brown, I think you got to get him in your lineup because of his role. He sees a ton of target share, first read targets. However, I just think it could be a little tough sledding this week. We shall see. If you can see here, the Rams have been pretty stingy, giving up points here to wide receivers. In terms of sitting, we have the great debate in 2023. Again, this game is absolutely insane for names I never thought I'd be saying. We have the great debate of Keontae Ingram or Imari Demercado. And then we have the question is, where will all Sweet Prince, Rondale Moore factor into all of this? In terms of how to handle this backfield, I think the best course of action between Ingram and Demercado would be sitting these running backs for the week and seeing how this backfield shakes out in real time. I don't think you're going to be missing much. The Rams have been pretty good at stopping the run so far. So I'd be cautious with Ingram or Demercado. However, the pace is great. The Cardinals factored a trail in this one. So if I had to start anyone, I would go with Demercado because of his pass catching role. In the games where Ingram and Demercado were healthy with James Conner, Demercado outsnapped Ingram 17-0 in passing situations. So I'd probably go Demercado because of the game script situations. I would really try to avoid it. But if I had to pick one, it'd be Demercado. Please, one time, let's get Rondale Moore involved. Let's turn him into Austin Eckler. That'd be incredible. I would not play Tyler Higbee in this one. It does not seem like a good plan. And even though we have a little bit of a squeaky wheel narrative with Michael Wilson and Josh Dobbs saying he texted Wilson after the game, saying, I got to get you the rock, bro. I don't think I wouldn't start Michael Wilson in this one. One nugget that I have here, Matthew Stafford is the only top 5 QB in passing yards this season that is also not in the top 10 in passing touchdowns. I think we have a word for this, fellas. What is this word here? How does it go?
Regression.
Stafford might be regressing his mean on Sunday.
Wow.
I think he's going to get busy in this matchup. So I like this one. I like the Rams a ton. They're a fun offense, and I'd get Stafford in the lineup, fellas. That's where I'm at.
I've got him in multiple routes. He's just out, he's just sitting on, I picked him up today in 2 leagues. Wasn't even claimed, and I was like, I'm not starting him over Howell. I was like, no, I'm starting Stafford.
Yeah. Is with Richardson hurt, he's the perfect Richardson replacement.
He's perfect.
I have to use Geno as a Richardson replacement this week, and I would kill for Stafford.
With cutback too, the touchdowns feel like they're about to flood. He's going to start running for multiple touchdowns a game, I think.
It's been easy money. Yep. All right, Keegan, you got the next matchup here. What are we talking about next?
Okay, a little bit of I wouldn't call it a stinker, but maybe not your first choice when you turn on the games on Sunday. And we're talking the Saints at the Houston Texans going to NRG Stadium in Houston. Weather should be good. No rain, 71 degrees. I'm sure it'll be humid and sticky as all hell in Houston, as it always is. Point total opened up at about 40.5, and now it's up to 42.5, so that's a good sign. Saints started out -2.5, now down to about -1.5. Pretty close game here, projected just by Vegas' standards. Pace, this should be up in pace for sure. Houston is 5th in adjusted pace, and New Orleans is 18th in adjusted pace. We should get a lot of plays in this game. just based off what we're projecting, just using adjusted pace and plays per game and things like that. But more plays equals more fantasy opportunities. More fantasy opportunities equals more fun in a matchup that maybe might not be the most fun. New Orleans comes into this matchup a pretty stout defensive team so far against fantasy points, just at major positions. Obviously, QB, they're only allowing like 13.1 points per game right now. Running back, they're 28th in the league, allowing about 14.1. And then wide receiver, they're giving up a little more there, allowing 32.4 points per game to the wide receiver position. And then tight end, they're actually last in the league, allowing only 6 points per game fantasy. Houston, on the other hand, they have some good spots. They have some okay spots, but they're not like, they're honestly a much improved defense. Like, big credit to D'Amico Ryans and all of the things that they brought over to Houston this year. They're kind of playing, I think, a little bit above their britches here. So I'm curious when that levy will bust. But QB, they're only allowing 16.3 points per game. Running back, they're allowing 24.1 points per game, a little bit more friendly to the running back position. Wide receiver, they've been pretty stout, but they're still 10th in the league, allowing about 25.6 points per game. Tight end, a pretty healthy amount, about 15 points per game as a position. So like I mentioned, Houston is much improved, but they are still, I just call them, middle of the pack, especially when it comes to fantasy production. Who I'm starting in this matchup and who I'm sitting is going to feel a little bit one-sided, but that's just kind of how I see this matchup. Starting Alvin Kamara. I mean, what he does with his touches isn't great, but how many touches he does get is great. And Houston has been a pretty big smash spot for fantasy running backs this year. They're allowing 1.2 touchdowns to the running back position right now a game. Right now, Alvin Kamara has handled 69%. Nice. Of the snaps and 4 out of 5 carries inside the 10 over the last 2 weeks. He just has a fantastic role, and it feels like another game you kind of have to start him. Plus, of course, there is the receiving upside work of Alvin Kamara always. I mean, he can pepper you for 13 receptions and 39 yards, and hey, in PPR, that is a game that we'll take, baby. It's not pretty. They don't ask how, they just ask how many. I
still can't believe that.
It's so bad. It's honestly so bad. But and the other guy I like that I think you got to start is Chris Olave. I mean, he's kind of been on the verge of regressing his mean a little bit as well too, and has not had the start to the season that you would like. But last week he was a 30-yard touchdown drop away from a massive fantasy day. I mean, he didn't have the yardage or the receptions last week, but he's still averaging like 8.6, almost 9 targets a game right now. And he dropped a touchdown, like I mentioned, like just barely. He would have had a massive day last week and kind of regressed back to that usage expected point total that we've kind of seen just off what he's been getting looked at for this year. Right now, he's second in the league in air yards. I had to double, triple check that right now. Second in the league in air yards, only behind A.J. Brown, I believe. So Chris Olave is just on the verge. He's edging his regression. He's getting closer and closer. And he's finally, I think this is the week.
Are you equating regress? You are really leaning into regressing is coming. We've been making those jokes for a long time now, but you just said edging. Okay.
It felt right. It felt right. And then I know we're just doing start and sits, but I had a kind of on the fence section for this team because I feel like CJ Stroud and Nico Collins are a little bit on the fence. New Orleans has been a really good defense this year, nonetheless. But CJ Stroud finally comes back down to earth last week, has his first sub 20-point fantasy outing. And he's a really good pocket passer, but that's also what he is. So for pocket passers to play in your fantasy lineups, you need them to throw touchdowns. So that's why I kind of have him as a fringe start. I think in good matchups, you start him, no questions asked at this point because you've seen him do it. But he's really got to throw a couple touchdowns to make his start worth it this week. But Saints have also given up the second fewest passing TDs in the league right now. So
a scramble. He needs a rushing touchdown, I feel like, to hit home or some random
something.
Variance.
So that's why I've got him on the fence. And along with that, just because of the matchup being bad for CJ Stroud, I also have Nico Collins as an on the fence start. You could flex him, I feel like, in be okay with it because his production's been good. He had a bad week last week, but he's getting shadowed by AJ Terrell. He'll also get shadowed this week by Marshawn Lattimore. So not an easy test for Mr. Nico Collins. But hey, Titus Howard's back. Laramie Tunsil's back. This is a good situation for Stroud. I feel like the rush defense is so good for New Orleans that they might actually have to lean more pass neutral this week. So that bump in usage could be good for Nico and CJ as well. As far as who you're sitting, you sit Dalton Schultz this week.
You can't sit Dalton Schultz. Come
you
on.
have to. I mean, Tank Dell is banged up, and Tank Dell is banged up. That's why Dalton Schultz got a little frisky.
You got to play him. He had 10 even though New Orleans has a tough matchup, tight end's so bad. You got to play him just off the target.
This is okay. I want you to hear what you're doing to me in this segment because this is completely different, but it's basically what I said about Breece, but this is like a way worse example. But you're doing the same thing that I said about Breece.
This is my segment, God damn it.
Yeah.
The people like when we fight, okay? That's been very clear. You can't sit Dalton Schultz, but you can sit Breece Hall because there's so many.
not this.
No, that doesn't make any sense. Like I said, Saints have allowed the fewest points to the tight end position this year in fantasy football. So awful matchup. Mike Thomas, I think you sit him this week. He's been really consistent this year, but Houston's been one of the better teams against fantasy wide receivers, fourth fewest points. He needs a touchdown to kind of hit home these 5 or 6 reception games for Michael Thomas, and like their production aren't great for fantasy wise. So it is what it is. I feel like you sit him, and then also I think you sit Dameon Pierce this week as well too. Like I mentioned, tough matchup on the ground. He hasn't really hit home at all. He's only had one game over 12 points in PPR. Brutal. Despite the amount of touches and opportunities he's getting in his role, it's a really, really bad matchup. And New Orleans is also fourth fewest EPA per carry and bottom in the league in rushing success rate. So
it's been a slog, but
it's going to be tough for the Texans.
He's going to have to score
a
touchdown.
I think the Texans offense, it's going to be tough.
A little nugget about that. New Orleans Saints have not allowed a single team to go over 100 yards on non-scramble runs this year. Like, they've been very good against rushing. So
he's going to need to score a touchdown.
Sit Dalton Schultz. Don't listen to Shaun, guys.
I mean, Dalton Schultz is ranked as a top 12 tight end across most sites. I just don't know how you sit him.
On what site? I'm looking at one right now. And he's 14.
I'm looking at Pat Thorman's rankings, who is the most accurate ranker in fantasy football last season, has him at 12. So.
Keegan 12. Keegan says 12. Keegan says
12. Are you playing a 12-man league? Okay. Well, this is more milk was a bad choice. We'll get there. I might have a lot of egg on my face after Breece rushes for 600 yards this week, and Dalton Schultz has 0 fantasy points. Aiden, what is your final matchup you're presenting on today?
Yep, I'm heading back to the East Coast. The fellas, haters can't stand us. Left hand up. They are on their way down to Atlanta, baby. They're headed down.
I didn't know you were doing this game.
Yeah,
I'm so excited.
The haters can't stand us. They are headed to the Mercedes Dome to play the Atlanta Falcons. I have this one just like in quotes, like it's like the who the hell are you people game, because like I still just have no idea like what either of those teams are. Like they're just so confusing on a week-to-week basis. Like I think we kind of know, but it's just like I don't think this game is going to be a ton of fun to watch. It's probably something I'll have like on the Red Zone channel. Falcons opened up as 2.5-point favorites. Opened up at 3.5 on this. Okay. They're 2.5-point favorites at this time. So, yep, all of mine are right around 3 points. These all figure to be pretty close games. Total opened up at 42.5. Yeah, that hasn't moved. It might be no, it's not the low. The Niners are lower. This will be one of the lowest totals.
Because of rain.
Yeah, the Niners are going to be lower. Even in a dome, and we're barely over 40. It's pretty much saying these people are stinky.
Bet the over, baby. Let's live a little responsibly.
Yeah, like
responsibly.
In terms of pace, this will be about middle of the pack. This is really polar opposites in terms of what we're looking at. Atlanta ranks 26th in terms of passing percentage, at just over 54%, whereas Washington is second, just below the Vikings at 68%. So like these are polar opposites. Washington is 17th in points per game. Atlanta is 27th. On the defensive side, Washington has given up the 30 most amount of points per game, whereas Atlanta is 10th. So again, it's like we're looking at the Washington offense, and they just want to throw the shit out of the ball and just go punch for punch with you, whereas Atlanta wants to run the football into the ground and suffocate you on defense. It's complete and polar opposites in this game, which someone's got to give, and we're gonna see how that shakes out. In terms of the positional breakdown, start with the Falcons here, pretty middle of the pack here. 17th to QBs at 15.9. They're giving up the least amount of points to running backs at just over 12 points, which is brutal. They are strong on the ground. 7th least to wide receivers, just over 27th. Second most to tight ends, though. The defense is pretty strong, but for whatever reason, they can't contain tight ends, so that's cool. Looking at the Commanders, they're generous, man. 5th most to QBs. Granted, they did just get torched by Josh Allen and Justin Fields, so definitely pump those numbers a bit. Pretty middle of the pack for running backs. About 12 least to around 18 points. 5th most to wide receivers. Again, you got Diggs and more back-to-back that definitely helped inflate those. 7th least to tight ends at just about 8 points per game. For starts and sits, it's probably about what you would guess. Obviously, Bijan's a smash start. He has 67 rush attempts with no TDs this year. I think he gets in for 2. It's gone far too long. He gets far too many touches for him still.
Just call your shot on 2?
2 touchdowns. He's not getting 1 touchdown. He's getting 2. Pencil it in. Bijan, baby. Bijan. Drake London has got to be licking his chops.
No, don't do this.
Drake London. We're doing it.
Don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. Please don't do this to me.
Unless Emmanuel Forbes is shattering him, which I don't even think that's a threat at this point, given what DJ Moore and AJ Brown have done to him in consecutive weeks. Like, that poor rookie has got to have just no confidence at this point. But I like Drake London in this matchup. I think he's got a really good thing going. Desmond Ridder actually did come off a really good game, threw for 300 plus yards. So I think this is actually a good spot for him. This is just kind of a fun one, but I'm just sitting Kyle Pitts just because it's just kind of fun. He's coming off his best game.
But what about the tight end one, Jonnu? What are you doing with their tight end one?
I'm good on both of them. I don't know anyone on this team because I saw it going exactly this way. So it's just whatever. You can start them at your own risk. I don't really have any advice for you with their tight ends. You're completely on their own. I don't know. I wouldn't start Ridder either. I didn't have him on my list. Looking at the Manders, I'm starting Sam Howell. I think he's just a fantasy quarterback. He's kind of just getting the job done in fantasy. It's not pretty. He's gonna have turnovers, but he's gonna have electric plays. He's got a good arm. He's got a good feel for defenses. So I'm starting Sam Howell.
Howell Hive, stand up, baby.
Yeah. In a 1 QB league, you have to be a little desperate. We've got bye weeks and some injuries, so maybe 2 QBs. Obviously, he's starting. I'm starting Terry. It hasn't been great for him, but it's been a lot more steady than Jahan Dotson. Dotson's actually on my sit list. He's gone over 10 points once this year. It just feels like the breakout we all had wished for is just it's. I don't know. It might still happen, but it's
Curtis Samuel. He's just
the volume hasn't been there.
All those points.
And on top of that, too, man, Logan Thomas, dude. Logan Thomas has been so much better than I think anyone.
Why is Eric Bieniemy scheming up routes and looks for Curtis Samuel and Logan Thomas over Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson?
They're good.
They're not better than those two.
No, they're not.
Samuel's really good. Samuel's been hurt by injuries, but he's every time he's been on the field.
Awesome wide receiver 3. The last guy that I'm sitting, this one kind of pains me because really awesome start for here. We thought he was kind of matchup proof given his role, is B-Rob. Last week was kind of tough, man. Gibson out-snapped him. I think he's going to be super touchdown dependent this week. As mentioned, the Falcons have given up the least amount of points to running backs. And if they go down, this is probably more of a Gibson type game, or at least in terms of who's going to be in the backfield. I think B-Rob's got a brutal matchup this week, so you are probably much better versed going elsewhere than B-Rob. But if he falls in for a touchdown, he'll probably get you, the 10 or 12 points that you're hoping for. So this one could be stinky. I really don't know how it's going to shake out. I wouldn't have this on the big screen by any means. I would have it on like a small quad box at best. I just think it's gonna be a weird game. Like, I don't have a ton of fun watching Falcons games. It's just like,
come on, Arthur.
No. And then every time they pan to him with the mustache and the hoodie tank top, I'm like,
so anxious.
I hate this guy.
I have to call it pass play. I have to, and he's like, just hates it.
So no nuggets here, but yeah, this should be an interesting game. I got 2 really fun games, so it's only right that I get this kind of what I fear is going to be a bit of a stinker.
I think this is going to be a really fun game.
I
have good vibes about this. Washington just got torched. Ritter just kind of went ape shit last week. I don't know if that's sticky week to week, but I'm kind of excited to see if the Falcons can pick up in pace, because it kind of feels like they can. And I texted this in the group chat, and Aiden was like, I don't see it. So we'll see there. The last matchup that I have, and Aiden, how do you say it? Where are we going? Down in where? Down in London?
Down in London. T might be a bad choice, eh?
Hey, T might be a bad choice. 6:30 a.m. for us on the West Coast, NFL Network. Baltimore at Tennessee. If I'm a Titan, I'm pretty hurt that this is a home game for us this
year.
No
more London games, bro. Enough.
I love them.
We're done.
I get up. No one's up. I'm vibing.
Wait till we're in Germany this year, my friend.
Germany's better than London. Germany gets Chiefs Dolphins.
Yeah, they got
Germany's getting all the good games.
They got the good stuff.
London's getting hosed in these Jaguars games. Jaguars Bills is a pretty good game, actually.
That was cool.
Looking at the Vegas angles here, we have the Ravens opening up as 5.5 point favorites. That line's all the way down to -4 in favor of Baltimore. This game opened at 42 as a point total. It has dropped to 41.5. So it stayed relatively consistent in terms of how many points Vegas is expecting. In terms of pace here, folks, it's going to be one of the slower games of the weekend. It's probably the only slow game that we're covering here on the podcast today. But it is a slow-paced slog. I'm kind of excited to see these two teams match up stylistically, two teams that want to run the ball and take deep shots. It's always kind of entertaining. That playoff game that they had was super entertaining, where King Henry was throwing touchdowns. It was a good time. So I think this is a fun one in London this weekend. Let's see if I can figure this out here in terms of speaking and also clicking things. When you're looking at the Tennessee Titans when they're on defense versus the Baltimore Ravens, both of these teams have pretty distinct edges on what they take away and what they give up. The Titans are 10th against QBs, surrendering around 14 fantasy points per game, 19th against running backs at 21. That was like 14 until they got absolutely Zach Mossed for that 33 burger. So that's just hilarious that they were one of the best rush defenses against fantasy running backs until they faced off against Zach Moss. So I don't know what that tells us about the Ravens this week. Versus wide receivers, they're 15th, averaging around 34 points per game. Against tight ends, 9th. On the Ravens side of things, they've got a pretty stingy defense. They've surrendered the second least amount of points to quarterbacks, the 12th least amount of points to running backs, the second least to tight ends here. But one thing here, they actually have surrendered a decent amount of receiving production to wide receivers. So curious to know how this shakes out on Sunday. Moving in to start and sit. So for start, Lamar and Zay, you're going to put them in your lineup. The Titans have been frisky against running backs, but Lamar's matchup proof. He hung up 28 points on the Browns defense. Zay Flowers has really good usage. Starting to see downfield targets more. Get him in your lineup. I think he's like kind of a fringe flex guy. I think after this week, Zay Flowers is going to be kind of a locked-in RB2 moving forward. DeAndre Hopkins is a sneaky great start this week against the Ravens secondary. Like we've called that, has been beat by wide receivers more than you would think. You got to start King Henry, but the Ravens have been ultra stingy to running backs. And Tajay, he's lurking. Tajay is lurking out there. So you got to start the King. You're not fading the King, but it's not a great matchup. Titans have been good against tight ends, but you're rolling out Mark Andrews. Come on. You have Mark Andrews. You're not sitting him. Mark Andrews is in your lineup. In terms of who we're sitting here, even after the Zach Moss explosion against the Titans in week 5, I'm probably leaving Gus Edwards and Justice Hill on the bench. Neither of these guys are super inspiring. They kind of eat into each other's roles. Keaton Mitchell, Keaton Mitchell, is that how you say his name? I don't know.
I want to say Keaton. Yeah.
Keaton, the UDFA, that's UDFA undrafted rookie running back. He's lurking coming off of IR. He's a smaller in space, like punt returner type back, but he may factor in. This could be like a 3-headed committee. I wouldn't start anyone here. I would leave Tajay on the bench. If this was a faster paced matchup and the Titans were clearly underdogs, I think Tajay is a fun little flex dart throw because he does play more when they're losing, but I just don't think you can start him in any lineups. And I would not stream Chig. I would go elsewhere. One nugget here. There are 14 wide receivers in the NFL this season that have a 40% air yard share and a 30% first read target share. I have these labeled as like my true alphas. You're getting all the yards. You're getting all the first looks. DeAndre Hopkins is one of these 14, and he's the only one of them that has not scored a touchdown this season, even though he has 4 end zone targets. So I think he might be regressing his mean on Sunday. I think he gets in the end zone. So I think he's sipping tea in the end zone. Hopkins tutty time. But that's my last matchup here. Keegan, why don't you take us home?
Okay. Last matchup of the day on the episode.
Let's get it.
Jared Goff and a kind of banged up Detroit Lions team, at least offensively, are going to travel to Tampa Bay and try and fight off the Buccaneers without some of their better players, or at least better skilled and talented players in this lineup. Jahmyr Gibbs will not be playing again, most likely. Amon-Ra St.
Their
Brown,
backup running back isn't going to be playing. It's okay. They'll be fine without their backup.
Amon-Ra St. Brown will be a go, but it also sounds like Sam Laporta will not be a go this weekend. So that's brutal. But good to see that the Sun God will be back. The point total right now, I had it down for 45. Let me just double check that is still the same.
It opened at 45.5, and it's down to 42.5.
42.5. Okay.
It's a decent drop.
Yeah, and it's got Lions minus 3.5. So still favored in the Lions position here. Pace. This one should be faster paced. I wouldn't call it the fastest paced game of the slate, but Detroit's 16th in plays per game, 29th in adjusted pace. I'd also expect them to kind of like determine how this game will go. They are entering this matchup 4-1. Have been lighting it up quite a bit offensively at the least, and their defense is much improved from the year prior. Detroit's points allowed this year to fantasy positions: quarterback 17.6, okay, middle of the road. Running back is where they have been really good this year. They're only allowing 12.6 points per game. That's 30th in the NFL. Pretty good improvement from the Detroit Lions. Wide receiver, though, there is some opportunity to be had from the wide receiver position in fantasy production, allowing about 37 points per game. Tight end also. Maybe Kate Otten this weekend? Who knows? Would you start him over Dalton Schultz? Possibly.
No.
But Detroit's allowing 16.8 points per game to the tight end position, third most in the league right now. Tampa Bay, on the flip side of it, they've been pretty good against quarterbacks, allowing a little less than 16 points per game. Running back, they're about 17th, so middle of the road, allowing almost 19 points per game. Wide receiver, allowing 33.7 points per game. Tight end, 9.1. So Tampa Bay has been pretty good defensively this year. I think that's what's kept them in a lot of games, and also Baker is playing pretty well this year, all things considered. Who you're starting in this matchup and who I like personally, you start Amon-Ra St. Brown, because he's back and he's healthy. He's a target hog, alpha wide receiver. When he's healthy, you play him no matter what. Also, a great matchup against a defense that's playing almost, I think they're either third or second in the league in deployment of zone defensive coverage right now, about like 81%. So a good matchup for Amon-Ra St. Brown. This depends on if Mike Evans is out or not, but I know he did log a limited participant today. But if he's out, you start Chris Godwin for sure. Absolutely, for sure. You start David Montgomery, of course, again, clear workhorse role. Dan Campbell came out and said more about how they view David Montgomery in his role.
Poetically waxed.
Play. Yes, poetically waxed.
He was like
about
crying
David
talking about Montgomery.
Also, Buccaneers, worst PFF run defense through 5 weeks. This is a top 10 running back play this week for David Montgomery.
Really?
And he's leading.
Is it really?
Or he's not leading. He's the
They
second.
haven't given up many fantasy points to running backs. That's interesting. PFF is saying we know better.
That's interesting. Sometimes I look at PFF and I'm like, how?
You sit Jared Goff, I think, this week. Home and away splits are still extremely wide. He's averaging 23.4 points at home and about 13.2 on the road, 10-point differential. Tampa Bay's been pretty stingy to opposing quarterbacks. Might be a good week to just look elsewhere. You sit Rachaad White this week. Detroit's been amazing against fantasy running backs this year, only allowing about 3.2 yards per carry. I know he has really good volume, but only one running back really has had a good week against Tampa Bay, and it's been Kenneth Walker. He's still not running super efficient just based off usage and how many points he's putting up with that usage, and you sit Baker Mayfield. I don't have a fantasy nugget for this game. I think it's going to be kind of bogged down just by the run game. I think it's a big David Montgomery opportunity. And no Laporta, no Gibbs, and Amon-Ra St. Brown is back. So
you guys hate RB2s. Sit Madison, White, Pierce, B-Rob. These guys are all 18, 19, 21, 20. You guys are elitists to RB1s. You guys have a real RB1 problem.
There's some tough
you
matchups.
Told me you would
sit,
these are awful matchups. You told me you would
brutal matchups.
Breece Hall
play
over
them. You have to
Madison.
play these guys.
I don't know. I would almost rather take dart throws. I'd almost rather take dart throws.
You don't have to play Rachaad White. You don't have to do that.
What? Right now, Breece Hall is ranked 17th by ECR. Rachaad White is 18th. Alexander Madison is 19th. They're all in the same bucket, which is just
anybody from
crazy to think about.
Where's B-Rob?
From 18 to 26 is all within a 0.25 point differential away.
It's just running back is brutal. B-Rob's at 21. Pierce is at 22. It's all these RB2s
I think
we know are going to get
17
the volume.
through 22. I literally think we sat all of them.
It's so hard because you're right. You should sit these guys. However,
the matchups suck, but you probably don't have a
you
better
might
choice.
just have to. It's with the injuries.
It's just like a root canal. You got to get it done, but you're this is probably going to suck. This is not going to go well.
Would you rather play Dameon Pierce this week or Chuba Hubbard, who's probably going to start against the Dolphins?
Chuba's pretty much taken it. He's pretty much taken that role already. I don't think it's really being talked about enough. Chuba's getting more snaps now. That's kind of his job.
Would you start Dante Foreman or Dameon Pierce this week?
Deontay Foreman, easy.
I don't know on that one.
Easy.
Against Minnesota's deep. This is why we need to do a ranking show.
If Roschon doesn't play,
we're going to get there.
Who else is touching the football out of the backfield?
Yeah, that's the argument, right?
It's Darrington Evans, who just got signed just off of Tennessee's practice squad last Sunday.
That's how you know week 6
Jonathan
is
Taylor
dark.
or Rachaad White?
Jonathan Tayller.
JT.
Oh.
It's close, though. You have to think about it.
Who does Indy play again?
Jags have a good rush defense, but you start your studs.
Man, he played 10 snaps last week. He probably plays 15
To be fair,
or 20.
he hadn't practiced or played football with his team.
But I don't think JT
forever.
gets more than 20 snaps this week. They're going to ramp him slowly. I might go Rashad, but I'm probably going to go JT. I don't think I could look myself in the mirror if I started Rashad White over
It gets
JT.
really hairy.
I couldn't look myself in the mirror if I did that. And then JT goes nuclear. I'm probably going, I'd probably have to go JT.
But that'll do it.
I would do it. I would have to start it. Yeah, this is why we eventually, dear mean team, dear listeners, we will be doing
We're gonna
a
get
ranking
rankings.
show. It'll be a lot of fun. But that's it. We covered 9 games. That's some good stuff, fellas. We hour 16. Look at us. That's not bad.
That's
we'll
a full pod, boys.
That's a
good.
full pod, boys. Before we sign off, Aiden, you got anything to say to the listeners?
2-4. Don't look down, but we are climbing up the standings.
Keegan. Anything for the listeners?
Happy Friday. Enjoy your weekends. I know this will come out tomorrow. So if you're listening tomorrow, enjoy your weekends. And
what a guy. Happy Friday. All right. Mean team. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate you. Until next time.